You mentioned the ML recommendations project a few times in our chat already, and I want to dig into that. Like, one of the things I enjoy the most about working at bigger companies, I've only had a few stints, but this idea of like more resources, specifically data engineering, data science, and even though you're not always getting your stuff on the roadmap, like it is cool to have access to that. And your typical startup, like you're lucky if there is one data engineer on the team, let alone like finding people to help you build like custom ML models to do the type of stuff that you were kind of describing there. But still, though, for many folks at those big companies, and I'm curious to hear if that's the case for you at Como. So, like those ML resources are not always shared and not always
Mm.
dedicated to marketing or life cycle. And sometimes you just have to like figure out a way to do it without them. What are your thoughts on this? And like, how do you kind of go to market when you don't always have access to those resources?
Well, I think the effectiveness of the ML itself from the regard of picking the recommendation wasn't like the mind blowing result that you
Mm.
might hope, right? In terms of like the amount, like the cost per user to generate those recs, and then the return of the engagement that we got probably didn't pan out. It was like an interesting, um, it was an interesting, like a nice technical achievement that we were able to pull off. But like I was talking about before, like in turning of getting that engagement and then turning into dollars down the line, I don't think it paid off.
Mm.
So we've kind of maybe, you know, moved away from that a little bit, but we can still reasonably like personalize according to at least some signal that we're getting from, your prior usage, which is what the ML was looking at anyway, right? So it was basically like, hey, Daryl happens to like soundscapes and he uses them a lot, and Phil likes sleep stories, so he uses them a lot. So like you kind of like we could approximate it, and it's not going to be like the ultimate thing, but we can say like, well, this person uses soundscapes more than the other things, we'll send them like the same thing of what they already used. It's just cheaper and faster that
Mm-hmm.
way. So there's some like, yeah, there was like some cost benefit like we had to like figure out in terms of whether it worked aside from the technical achievement. But then in terms of getting the resourcing, that one was like they had already built it, right? So like I was just trying to get like an into it. I don't know that there was any special magic that like we pulled off. Like if you want, at the end of the day, it's ML is the personalization, at least from this regard. So it's just like if you can personalize it at a broad level, that's better than nothing. And then like the more you can prove that the personalization is impacting things, then the more likelihood that somebody's going to start paying attention to what you're working on, I think.
Very cool. So the takeaway is almost like if you don't have access to like a fancy propensity model to tell you the next best action that a user should be taking, sometimes there's a lot of value in just looking at that first party data in your product analytics tool that is helping you figure out the direction of potentially the next best action for some of these things by just looking at like what Daryl has interacted with recently or stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just showing them something that they've already seen before seems to help, like seems to work.